We've learned that ritual bronze vessels were central to political and spiritual life for the Shang and Zhou cultures. We also need to consider how those ritual bronze implements were made. The technique used to produce them emerged in the Shang dynasty, and it is called piece mold production. You already saw amazing bronze sculptures made in the Chola dynasty in South Asia. As the video, The Story of India, A Golden Age, showed you, that technique was called lost wax casting. It's different than what the Chinese used. Chinese artisans certainly knew the lost wax technique. They did use it. They used it fairly often, but their preferred technique was the piece mold technique. Yet it is actually harder. It takes more steps. It's more finicky. So why did they use it? This drawing shows you a kind of simplified rendering of how a vessel is produced using the piece mold technique. If we were to go into detail step by step, we would see it's incredibly complex. So we're just going to whittle it down to the gist of it. You make a bronze vessel like this by first making a clay model of the object. That clay model is fired, and then you make a second clay mirror image for the interior. So think of it in kind of down-home terms as two clay forms that are like the pieces of bread in a sandwich. And in the middle of the sandwich is a space, not for meat, but for pouring molten metal. So you have this framework of clay pieces that provide the shape, the outer shape, and the inner shape. The metal pours into the in-between spaces. So this diagram, it would be nice if it could show you inside the square form, in the hollow interior, is another clay piece that mirrors the design, right? So the design matches interior and exterior. So there's a pouring channel with a duct, which is a tube or passageway. And once the metal has solidified, as this rendering shows, you can remove the clay pieces. That's what I like about this drawing. It's showing you how you can take away the clay pieces one by one. With the lost wax method, you'd also use clay as your form, but in the lost wax method, you break apart and discard broken clay. You don't have these pieces. That's what's important. You can separate and preserve these clay pieces to make more vessels. And this is the key to why Chinese metal workers used piece mold casting. They wanted to make additional replicas of the same bronze object. Not one, but 10 or 20 or 30 and so on. Why do you want more? Because your royal patrons want tombs that are filled with bronzes like treasure chests, because quantity is prestigious. If you look at this diagram of the tomb of Fu Hao from the Shang dynasty, the consort of Wu Ding, you'll see an archaeological diagram that maps out her stash of bronzes. Now look at much later, here we are 433 BCE, in the Zhou dynasty, looking at the tomb of the Marquis Yi of Zheng. And so this is about 1,000 years later than Fu Hao's. Notice how we have the repetition of the exact same object. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There is a prestige value in abundance, the repetition of the exact same object. This became more and more desirable from the Shang to the Zhou dynasty. The ability to show that you have immense a mass of bronze is a sign of your status, because bronze was a sensitive material, a power material, a weapons material. The ruling class monopolized it. So this is a kind of repeated wealth, a display of splendor, a culture of ostentatious competitive display. And so in the Zhou dynasty, we see hordes of ritual objects that are buried not just in the tomb, but apart from the tomb. So you actually have your grave goods, and then you have a kind of additional treasure chest full of stuff for your afterlife buried alongside it. We have a race for conspicuous consumption. So the Shang dynasty was overtaken by the Zhou dynasty, but culturally speaking, there was real continuity. We don't think of these as two different cultures. We think of them as two sets of power families in the same culture that's developing over time, with multiple dynasties vying to control each other's fiefdoms, which is their small territories. So what I want you to understand is that in this shift from the Shang dynasty to the Zhou dynasty, the bronze making system becomes a production system that relies on modular production in a workshop system. So modules are interchangeable standardized parts. Legos are a modular system. They can be interchanged to make multiples. So what I'm saying is that the piece mold casting used module components to allow for mass production. It's often said in the West that Henry Ford invented mass production with his assembly lines. Actually, no, China did. And China did in the Zhou dynasty circa 700 to 500 BCE, where you get standardized parts or interdependent units used to create a complex structure. And this will actually play out in multiple artistic lineages in China, including the bracket system for wooden architecture, including the Qin Emperor's famous army. We'll see that soon. A brilliant art historian named Craig Clunas figured this out. And he did so first step with that art history skill of close observation. So he looked closely at this Shang dynasty ritual vessel. Now you can see that it's a very symmetrical design, as we see in Shang and Zhou art forms. You have the left side mirroring the right side, the repetition of the thunder pattern of squared spirals. But if you look really, really closely, as Clunas did, and I know it can be hard on the video, you'll see that the thunder pattern, they repeat, but they're not perfectly matched. There's a slight difference in the way that the squaring and the curving happens, a slight difference of space. So you can tell that each piece was done by hand. Each element was hand carved. And by carved, I mean the clay was carved in to have a design. But it wasn't this repeated modular design yet. So then look what happens. Clunas knew this particular basin. Again, he studied it very closely. Very microscopic observation. It's a Zhou dynasty vessel. And he studied it and he knew that he had seen another basin exactly like it in another museum. And so he set up a close physical visual examination of the two. They matched identically. There was no difference, subtle difference, that would indicate handwork. They were created in a modular system of production using repeated parts. And this allows for the Zhou bronze vessel to also get more elaborate and complicated with a more intricate detailing. And here you see the technology of bronze making working hand in hand with the patron's desire for quantity. And together they're developing a system of mass production.